In a small town near Boston in America, a woman has mysteriously disappeared, leaving her baby son behind at home. Katherine Romano hasn't been seen for more than 24 hours, and her family are extremely worried. Katherine's husband has told neighbours she has left him, but her family don't believe she would abandon her child. And when police look around the family home, it's clear something is wrong. The couple's entire bed is missing from their room, and detectives later find traces of blood between the floorboards. Police believe Katherine Romano has been murdered, but there is no sign of the body. Catching a killer requires conclusive forensic evidence. From clues at the scene of the crime to minute examination in the forensics lab, from the cold reality of the pathologist's table to DNA sampling, digital analysis, each piece of killer evidence brings the murderer closer to justice. It's a quiet autumn day in the small town of Quincy, near Boston, Massachusetts, when the police receive a distraught phone call.
Quincy Police, what's your emergency?
The caller's married daughter, Katherine Romano, is missing. Katherine lives in Quincy with her husband, Joseph Romano, and their 2-year-old son. She's been missing for more than 24 hours, which is totally out of character. What is even more peculiar is that Katherine's husband is telling her friends and colleagues she's been drinking, taking crack cocaine, and has now run off with another man.
Katherine's mom had called, I believe she was in Florida, and they hadn't been able to get in touch, and they weren't getting any response at home, so they called the police station to see if we could follow up on it. I was called in to the station. They asked if I could perform a well-being check, go to the house to see if she was around.
Katherine's mother reports her missing ahead of the husband, Joe. She knew her daughter loved her child and would never leave the child alone with anybody for 24 hours. That was her motivation to say, please look at this, something is not all well. I don't believe what husband Joe is saying. And the police, acting on instinct and a great deal of experience, decided, okay, we'll do a light touch investigation probe in the first instance and we'll see what we may find.
When I first arrived at the house, I pulled up on the side. There was a closed gate, fenced-in area. He had a German Shepherd. But he was friendly enough to me. I came up, smelled my hand, I patted him, went in the gate, went up the side door. And I knocked on the door. I was met by Joe Romano. He was making dinner for his son, young son. He invited me into the kitchen. This would have been 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I explained my reason for being there. And he showed me that left Post-it notes on the refrigerator, stating that a number of people had called that were looking for Katherine. He didn't seem overly concerned. He figured that she would come home because her bike was there, her motorcycle was there, and she loved her motorcycle, so he thought she'd be coming back for it. I asked him if he knew where Katherine was, and he stated that she may have left with someone from work. She may have been using drugs.
Katherine had a job at the local ironworks. She was always punctual, so when she didn't turn up, her foreman contacted her husband. Joseph told him that Katherine hadn't been home and he didn't know where she was. There had been no suggestion that she might be with a work colleague.
I asked if I could take a look around the house, and he obliged. There was no signs of struggle. I did look around to see if there was any blood or broken glass or anything on the floor as I was walking around, and I didn't see anything. I checked the living room, and he stated that he was sleeping in the living room, and then he showed me a bedroom. And he said that she was sleeping in there, but there was no bed in the bedroom. There was no mattress, there was no frame, there was nothing. It was just an empty space. It just seemed odd. I asked him where the bed was, and he stated that the baby had wet the bed, so they had to get rid of it. To throw the mattress and the box spring and the bed itself out because the baby had wet the bed, it just didn't seem to make sense. At that point, I figured That's enough to get a search warrant.
Officer Gilmore is so suspicious that the Quincy Police Department now contacts the Massachusetts State Police to enlist their help in searching for Katherine. Detective Lieutenant Joe Flattery takes over the investigation into Katherine's disappearance and travels out to Quincy.
The state police had jurisdiction over all homicides and unattended deaths because pretty much that's all we did. We did homicides and we did death investigations. But we would work with the local police departments who always had a pulse of the neighborhood. They knew the people in their towns, so their information was invaluable to us.
Detective Lieutenant Flaherty agrees there is cause for concern.
Miss Romano would be in touch with her father and sister and family on a everyday basis, pretty much. And when they didn't hear from her for over 24 hours, they became concerned because the parents knew that she was having marital difficulties, marital problems with her husband, Joe.
You wouldn't go into a full-scale alert investigation after 24 hours, but each circumstance is different, and this one was quite odd.
The first thing the state police do is to check whether she has just left home, as her husband claims.
The family did tell us that she drove a Cadillac with Florida plates on it. The vehicle was found parked in a garage in Quincy, and nobody was with the car. She was nowhere to be found around the car. The car had been there for several days. It was still a concern that she was missing.
Katherine is still not answering her cell phone. And with the discovery of Katherine's car parked in a garage, and with her motorbike still at the house, police are now worried she may have come to some harm.
I remember asking one of the detectives if he could get us into the house just one more time to identify if, in fact, we had a crime scene at the house. It was to be a cursory search. In other words, we're going in there and we're looking for any sign of blood or any forensic material in the house.
At this point, Joe Romano is still insisting Katherine has run off and allows officers to search the home. Detective Lieutenant Ken Martin of the Massachusetts State Police leads the preliminary forensic work.
We went into the residence. We got the okay to check the entirety of the home, one floor. As I walked through, it was dimly lit. There was paneling on the walls, so again, not only dimly lit, but it was dark due to the fact that we had these dark walls. So I went through with my flashlight looking for evidence of some type of crime.
We're going in there and we're looking for any sign of blood or any forensic material in the house. We went in and Ken Martin, in a very simple way, took out a very small flashlight and he shut off the lights and he put the flashlight on paneling in one of the rooms. And immediately you could see from dust impressions that were on the paneling, you could see where the paneling had been washed.
It's called oblique lighting. You can put the flashlight up against the wall in this case, and I could actually see the swirls of where someone had wiped down the wall.
And after he realized that there was some cleanup of the paneling, he put his light on the baseboard and he saw red brownish stains which were consistent with blood spatter.
Blood found on the walls indicated that an attack may have taken place in the bedroom. It was the first piece of evidence in the case.
Blood is an incredibly adhesive substance. The hemoglobin within the blood, the molecule that carries oxygen within the blood, is an incredibly powerful binding agent, and it sticks to everything. So if you're trying to clean a crime scene, it's practically impossible to eliminate all trace of blood. And experienced forensic officers using tried and trusted techniques can easily discover blood at a crime scene despite all the best efforts of any criminal, any murderer, any killer.
When I went close to the floor, I could see some spatter not only in the master bedroom, but the adjoining room that one would have to go through to get into the master bedroom was the child's bedroom. And again, there was some evidence there on the wall and on the bed itself and some other areas which indicated to me that something had gone on not only in the bedroom, but also in the child's bedroom as well.
Well, at that point, we had determined that we had enough probable cause to then secure the premises, stop the search, and go back and write up a search warrant to get a court order to go in there and further investigate the red bound stains and the blood spatter that was in the house.
Police believe that a violent attack has taken place in this house, and Katherine Romano has gone missing. Whatever has happened to her, detectives have every reason to believe that her husband is responsible, but they need proof. The priority now is to secure the crime scene and get the forensics team in there as soon as possible, before any evidence is contaminated, removed, or destroyed. So far, they've been allowed into the family home by Katherine's husband, Joseph Romano, who insists she has walked out on him and their son. But now they're going to need a full search warrant.
It was really Katherine's mother who was the impetus behind this. You know, she continually called the police department every day. She was calling the detectives every day. Then she called the district attorney's office looking for assistance as well.
Although Katherine Romano is missing, because there's no body, they still need proof she's actually been killed. So the police have to work hard to make sure they can persuade the judge to grant the warrant.
Search warrants take several hours. I mean, you have to put a lot of detail into the search warrant. You have to identify the premises, and you have to establish probable cause for the clerk or the judge who signs the warrant, and a reason to believe that we will find additional evidence of a crime inside the premises. So the search warrant, writing it up, getting it to the court, getting it signed, and then going back to do the search could take anywhere from 4 to 6 hours. As soon as we had the authorization from the court to do a further search, Ken Martin went back there, but this time he went back there with several chemists from the crime lab to assist him.
Joseph Romano is sticking to his story that his wife has run off.
Went to the house, identified ourselves, and the reason for being there. And Mr. Romano allowed us in. He stayed in the kitchen with myself and his son and Officer Silcox while the other officers went through the house.
At this point in the investigation, keeping the potential crime scene free of any contamination is vital.
We've started methodically going through the house. Everything that was found was also videotaped and photographed.
We cut up the floor to look for additional biological material which may have leaked down through the floor.
And underneath the flooring was a pool of blood that could be quantified. I mean, there was a lot of blood underneath that had seeped into the subfloor.
Whoever's tried to clean the blood from the floor hasn't done a very thorough job.
Not only on the floor where the baseboard was covering, but also on the underside of the baseboard were some dried clot areas and also what appeared to be some dried tissue, some biological material. Then in another area where we were processing between the child's room, the baby's room, and the master bedroom, there was a threshold there, and the threshold was somewhat unfinished, but you could see where the blood had actually seeped into the wood there.
And the blood isn't only in the bedrooms.
And actually, when we went down into the basement, it actually had dripped down through the subfloor, as it's called, down onto the basement floor below.
Police now have their second piece of evidence and take samples of the blood to test for Katherine's DNA.
We weren't sure how the victim had been taken out of the house. We were checking each of the stair treads because there were wooden stair treads going down. They had been freshly painted. Likewise, the basement floor had been freshly painted. Whomever had painted the floor had gone through and painted the floor in such a way where they went up to the washing machine and stopped, Whatever was on the floor, they didn't take the time to move it. So essentially we had this newly covered floor or painted floor in just the areas that were exposed. When we went to the washing machine, there were a couple of blood drops on the actual washing machine controls.
Although they have no body, police are certain Katherine has been violently attacked and decide to formally question Joseph. But he seems completely unrattled by his arrest.
Mr. Romano was told that he was going to be taken into custody. He asked if he could have a moment to make up some bottles for his young son. He was allowed to do so. His son was going to be staying with a neighbor, and he came to the station without incident.
We brought Mr. Romano back to the police department, did an interview of him that night. We asked him why Miss Romano's blood spatter would be in the house, why her blood would be on the floor, why her blood would be on the walls. He had no memory of why they were there. His story was that she got up and went to work in the morning and just never came back, and he didn't know where she was or what she was doing, and that was it.
But police don't believe him.
Whether guilty or innocent, under interrogation, perhaps being a person of interest or a real suspect, it's a nervous situation. People are suspecting you of a terrible thing, they're questioning you under pressure. So for Joe Romano, he'd every reason to be nervous, every reason to be agitated and concerned. For the police, they have to discern whether this agitation, these nerves, are a function of his guilt or it is normal behavior. It's not a crime to be nervous in an interrogation suite. It's not a crime to be agitated when you're being harassed and peppered with questions about your missing wife, who you might rightfully be concerned and terrified about what might have happened to her.
Police decide to release information about the disappearance of Katherine Romano to the media. They appeal for anyone who has seen anything suspicious to come forward. And they soon receive reports of Joseph Romano loading a soiled mattress onto his truck.
We went and talked to several friends of his, several of them that saw the mattress on his truck. One of them he asked to actually take the material to the dump for him, and the man that he spoke to didn't want to do it, so he didn't. We suspect that it was put into a landfill.
Police are now even more convinced that a violent incident has taken place. But they have no evidence of how Katherine Romano was attacked or where she is now. Then they get a second call.
The district attorney's office received a phone call that one of the neighbors had seen the story recently on the news and recalled that Mr. Romano had borrowed his Sawzall, or reciprocating saw. Sawzall's a brand name, reciprocating saw is a type of saw.
We had a conversation with the neighbor. Neighbor said he borrowed it. We asked him when he brought it back to him. So the neighbor took out a calendar to see if he could determine when he gave the saw to Mr. Romano and when Mr. Romano gave it back. Mr. Romano, according to the neighbor, gave the saw back to him about a week and a half or 2 weeks before Miss Romano was even reported missing. So if you took the word of the neighbor, then that saw couldn't have been used on Miss Romano because it would already have been given back.
But has the neighbor remembered the timings correctly?
The most fallible thing in any investigation is, of course, memory, recollections, witness testimony. In this case, the neighbor is adamant that his time frame is correct, which then would eliminate Joe Romano as a potential suspect. But the police are experienced. They understand that people are fallible, and when it comes to timings, we all get it wrong. We barely remember what we did yesterday, let alone 2 weeks previously. So investigators understand that witnesses get things wrong.
The saw was brought into the office and we took a look at it. And granted, you don't want to be handling a piece of evidence until it gets up to the lab to be documented. But upon opening the case, you could clearly see that there was some, what appeared to be tissue up in that area of where the blade locks into the actual armature of the reciprocating saw.
The saw is the third piece of evidence in the case. Flesh found on the saw leads police to suspect that Katherine's body was dismembered.
Dismembering a body is not an easy task. The first thing is you need to cut down the skin to the bone to expose the bone. So the skin and the soft tissues themselves are not difficult to cut through if you have a sharp blade, but the bones are the most difficult part. And very often someone will use a saw for that part. And that can be anything from a hacksaw to a wood saw right through to an electric saw. It's the bones which will give the most resistance to the dismemberment process.
If Katherine's body has been dismembered, that could explain why there are traces of blood in more than one room in the house.
In order to get to the master bedroom, you had to make your way through the child's room on the opposite side where the child's headboard was for his twin bed. We could see not only stains on the wall, but some stains, blood stains on the actual headboard, the metal headboard as well. And looking at what we had, the saw, and the evidence that was in the baby's room, that some of the cutting, if not all of the cutting, had occurred in the baby's room.
So the identification of blood in several rooms may indicate that the person causing the dismemberment has moved between those different rooms rather than the dismemberment occurring in those different rooms. The other possibility is, of course, that once the dismemberment has occurred, those body parts have been moved into those rooms as well.
Working on the theory that Romano cut up Katherine's body in the house, police now need to positively identify the tissue on the saw as being from Katherine Romano. But without her body, there could be a problem.
Miss Romano's missing, so we can't get a DNA sample of her. She's the focus of the investigation. We were able to find out that Miss Romano had a procedure done at Beth Israel Hospital in Boston. As part of that procedure, they kept some tissue, and that tissue is in the histology section of their lab there at the hospital. We recovered that, and now we had a known sample of Miss Romano's DNA.
While police wait for the DNA results on the tissue from the saw, they try to work out how Katherine was killed before she was dismembered.
What incapacitated her initially, which led to her ultimately being cut up, we don't know. One would assume you'd have to have some type of blunt force trauma to get to the point where you can do some cutting. He would have had to have disabled her, whether it be through drugs or narcotics, or through some type of debilitating injury. We don't know, because there wasn't sufficient bodily fluids, not necessarily blood, but bodily fluids to do a toxicological examination.
Then the team gets another useful lead. A witness comes forward to tell them that Joseph Romano kept a baseball bat in his bedroom in case of intruders. Police now question whether the baseball bat might have been the murder weapon.
The baseball bat had something to do with it. Clearly there was an item that was struck down with force and came back, and the blood was spattered over the walls and the door jambs and again on the floor. We were never able to recover the bat.
Police refocused their investigation onto the missing saw blade they believe was used to dismember the body. They thoroughly searched the house, the basement, and the yard.
We never recovered the actual 12-inch blade for the Sawzall, but we did recover the wrapper that it was in, that the neighbor said was not his. So he did at one point use a 12-inch Sawzall. Sawzall blades are usually 4 or 5 inches, unless you have something significant and a lot larger that you want to cut through.
The wrapper is the fourth piece of evidence. And as detectives search the Romano kitchen, they find shopping receipts for saw blades, which confirm that Romano bought a blade on the day that Katherine disappeared.
It was bought at a hardware store where Mr. Romano had also bought cleaning supplies and paint for the house and the cleanup that he did.
This saw is crucial evidence, but it's not the murder weapon. If they're going to charge Joseph Romano with murder, they need more questions answered. Katherine Romano has now been missing for more than 6 weeks. Detectives have amassed a wealth of forensic evidence from inside the family home, suggesting Katherine has been murdered and dismembered. They have found blood on the walls and between the floorboards. They've discovered that her husband, Joseph Romano, borrowed his neighbor's saw, and they found a wrapper from a saw blade and shop receipts for new blades. The evidence all suggests Joseph Romano murdered his wife. But without her body, police don't know how she was killed. Finding Katherine's remains become their #1 priority.
We brought in a ground-penetrating radar machine that looks for voids underneath the concrete. You always suspect, especially somebody who's in the construction field, would know that you could saw cut the solid floor in no time and take the slab out and put something underneath it, put the slab back and just cover it up with cement. And you would never know that was done unless you brought in a ground penetrating radar to look for that, which we did. They did see a void in the basement, and that was eventually dug up, and there was nothing in the void.
It's another dead end for the frustrated detectives in the hunt for Katherine Romano.
There's no such thing as quickly if you're doing it right. Years ago, we used to spend 3 or 4 hours at a crime scene. Nowadays, we could spend 3 or 4 days because the science is there between the DNA technology and the different instruments you can use to find evidence of a crime. You don't just walk through a crime scene now and walk out the door a couple of hours later and be done. You keep that crime scene sometimes for a week if you have to, depending on what you have to do.
As police continue to search the property for Katherine's body, another neighbour comes forward with what they think could be a valuable lead.
I believe it was the Monday or the Tuesday following her disappearance. One neighbor had noticed there was an inordinate amount of trash bags out on the side of the road. I think the estimate was around 20 bags.
We're looking in landfills. We're looking for the mattress. We're clearly looking for Miss Romano. We did have evidence from the waste management company that picked up the trash at his house that on one of the particular days, there were a lot more bags than there usually is.
Police now suspect Romano threw out his wife's body with the rubbish.
Joe understood he had to get rid of those body parts. All flesh will begin to decay, and within a day or two, a very distinctive smell will emerge.
It's a gas which you can't disguise, so it will be in the atmosphere around and you'll be able to smell it. This gas is very distinctive, so you wouldn't be able to confuse it with, say, decomposing rubbish, normal general rubbish. It has a very particular smell. The next thing that happens, of course, is once the smell starts liberating and starts filling the air, you'll then attract flies. So that will be the next telling sign that there are body parts or a dead body within the vicinity.
And of course, the unwitting collectors never knew they were collecting body parts. They just thought they were collecting the normal domestic detritus. So it's clear he had planned for the collection day. Those bags were gone by the time the police arrived, within 24 to 48 hours.
Police are hopeful that they might finally be able to find the body. They needed to be sure of a conviction. Detectives locate the specific truck that picked the rubbish up and throw their resources into searching the dump.
Detectives tracked down the company that was working that area and ultimately where the trash bags went to. They were able to track down the actual trash truck. We actually conducted an examination inside the trash bin of the back of the trash truck to look for any evidence in there, whether it be blood or whatever. They actually went to a landfill.
and those landfills all day long are turned over as more trash comes in. There were literally 30, 40, 50 tons of trash that would go into these landfills over the period of time that we were interested in. Usually, unless you get there within a couple of days, it's very difficult to find what you're looking for.
Landfills, they actually keep a very meticulous record as to where each of these trucks drops their load.
But again, with somebody that's been missing for 4 or 5 days before we even got involved, that would be a lot of days to be looking for where they could have dumped on a particular day. So we knew it was literally a needle in a haystack, but we wanted to do it anyway just in case we got lucky and found it. And they moved a lot of the rubbish for us, but nothing came up.
The failure to find any evidence at the dump means that police have to continue to work on finding more forensic evidence at the house.
We still had to prove, beyond a reasonable doubt at some point, that Mr. Romano had anything to do with his wife's disappearance or her death.
Then finally, they find the missing bed from the Romano's room.
The house was elevated on a cinder block foundation, and there was a little niche there, and basically within that was the frame of the bed. So basically we had the 2 side rails, we had the cross rails, and you could see the elevated wheel area with the 4 wheels. When we pull that out, you could see where on one of the side rails blood was still apparent.
The bed frame is the 6th piece of evidence. Now they can take the analysis of the patterns of blood traces in the master bedroom one stage further.
Ken Martin brought the frame back up to the same room, set it up, and he did that so he could see whether the cast-off of blood on the walls was consistent with somebody lying in the bed.
So when people sustain injuries and bleed into a crime scene, just as an example, then we can look at the pattern of those bloodstains to almost allow a narrative to be placed on their actions and their activities after they were injured. So the injuries themselves will lead to a particular type of pattern to be produced. And then if somebody has assaulted them in any way, then we can look at the distribution of bloodstains to try and establish what happened to them in those final moments before they died.
Bloodstain patterns have the ability to make or break a case, and that's why blood spatter forensic experts are so crucial to many of these type of cases, and this is one in particular. It can build a story to how the crime took place, who was there, and how a person died. Blood spatter experts are now, they are practically gods in the forensic arena.
You could see literally still a blood trail adhering to the frame. You could see where it had been amassing and dripping down onto the floor below, and again corresponded to the area of the floor that we cut open to find the blood between the floorboards as well as the subfloor, and as it corresponded to the wall where we found the areas of the wipe marks or the swipe marks along with that baseboard, again all in that area.
Certainly a possibility that she was laying in the bed when the attack occurred based on the physical evidence, the forensic evidence. There's really no way of knowing whether she was actually asleep or not.
Police now think it's more than likely that Romano killed Katherine in bed by bludgeoning her with a baseball bat, and that he dismembered her body before disposing of it in the weekly garbage collection. But they still have not found her body, so they don't have actual evidence that Katherine is dead. Then the DNA results from the body tissue on the power saw finally come back.
The lab called us and said there is bone, cartilage, muscle, skin, and tissue in the gearwork of the reciprocating saw. Remember, we had a known of Katherine Romano, of her DNA from a test she had at the hospital, and we had the tissue that was taken as a result of that test. And eventually we were able to match the DNA of Kathy Romano to the tissue and bone and cartilage and everything that was in that sawzall.
The forensic laboratory has also found lymph node cells on the power saw. Lymphatic tissue is only found deep within a body, in the neck, armpit, chest, abdomen, and groin.
Dr. Melissa Upton, she found lymph node cells, which was extremely interesting and unique. There's no way anyone would find that in their home. That is purely in a hospital setting, because again, that would take some type of cutting deep into the tissue to reach those lymph nodes. And they were able to associate the DNA of that blood and tissue to Katherine Romano. At least based upon what I've seen in the past and other cases I've worked on, certainly I had the belief she had been certainly killed there and possibly cut up there, but the lymphatic tissue cemented that or certainly put that to rest, that she had been cut up there.
The evidence from the sawzall was critical because it's pretty hard to explain away how somebody's bone and muscle and tissue get on an instrument like a sawzall, and it's all up inside the mechanism that makes it work. So clearly it was used on her, and somebody that was cut with a sawzall would need immediate medical attention. In this case, we know there were no records of anybody going to the hospital. All the hospitals were checked around Quincy, Boston. None of them had anybody with her name that came through. And we believe that's what he used to, not necessarily to kill her, but certainly to cut up the body and get rid of the body.
But no one has ever been convicted of murder in the state of Massachusetts without a body. So police can only hope that the huge amount of forensic evidence they have gathered from the family home is enough to convince a jury that Joseph Romano has killed his wife. They have discovered blood on the walls and between the floorboards. They found flesh inside the mechanism of a saw which Joseph Romano borrowed from his neighbor. And they have found a wrapper from a saw blade and shop receipts for new blades. They have also found the couple's blood-stained bed frame hidden underneath the house. The DNA on every item matches back to Katherine Romano. So although they don't have her body, despite making every effort to find her, they've built up a huge amount of circumstantial and forensic evidence linking Joseph, her husband, to her death. And they're determined to bring the case to trial.
This trial was all about forensic evidence. Not just the amount, I think, but with the instruments that were used, and we know were used on her, which was the sawzall. You cannot get around the sawzall if Kathy Romano's blood and bone and tissue and muscle and everything is on that instrument. You can't get around that. I mean, clearly that was used, and it was used on her, and you look to see who might have had a motive, the opportunity to do that, and clearly that was Mr. Joseph Romano.
Any successful prosecution relies upon two things: motive and opportunity. And it was clear from the outset that Joe Romano had both.
I think the motive was the fact that they were not getting along, that there was talk about separating. There was talk about them having physical altercations. Supposedly, she was going to move to another city, and then other people said that she was going to stay in the house and she was going to make him move to another city. So those are possible motives. Certainly, opportunity is there. They're living in the same house.
The police have one further card to play before they go to court. If the Romano's young son was in the house at the time of the murder, the forensic evidence suggests he was a witness. But questioning a young child has to be approached very carefully. Pediatric trauma specialists at the Boston Medical Center use dolls so that the little boy can show them what he has seen. As he plays, he makes the daddy doll fight the mummy doll. Then he curls into a ball and sobs. He cries, "Mommy's hurt, Mommy's hurt."
Although it's very contested territory, the evidence from a young child or vulnerable witnesses, where that testimony matches and really twins up and dovetails with the forensic evidence and all the other crime scene narrative that the police have managed to amount, then it's very powerful and persuasive evidence. And in this case, the young 2-year-old child of Joe and Katherine Romano proved to be a very persuasive witness indeed.
The little boy's memories are the final piece of the jigsaw. Now police have the killer evidence they've been looking for. Despite never finding Katherine's remains, 3.5 years after first arresting Joseph Romano, they charge him with his wife's murder. On Monday, 29th of April 2002, the case goes to trial. The outcome is by no means certain. Detectives hope the prosecutor can secure a conviction, even though Katherine's body has never been found. If he can, it will be the first case of its kind ever to be successfully prosecuted in the state of Massachusetts.
Well, the court records a sad story, Joe Romano's attempt at a bogus defense. It reports, on Tuesday, September 29th, a concerned friend of the victim came to the house. The defendant, Joe Romano, said Katherine had come over the weekend, thrown her bed and mattress into the trash and gone off with a former boyfriend, and Romano had claimed that Katherine was drinking and doing crack cocaine and had won $5,000 on a lottery ticket. This was the substance of his defense. Preposterous, but it gives hint to the suggestion that she was still alive and also that somebody else, maybe even a former boyfriend, was responsible if she was dead. Clearly, the jury were going to struggle to try and believe that.
Romano also suggested that Katherine was killed because she owed money to drug dealers. The prosecution's case is entirely built around forensic evidence that has taken the police more than 3 years to collect.
In order to get a conviction on a case with no body is a pretty high standard. People would say luck, but you know, we were out there trying to get lucky by talking to everybody and going and knocking on every door and landfills and all the things we did, along with the Quincy Police Department, who were terrific. And it's that combined effort, I think, that would enabled us to come up with the first homicide without a body ever in Massachusetts.
We're talking about a good 300 years of court cases, and this was the first, as far as I know.
One of the most remarkable things about this case is that it was entirely possible that this case would have gone unsolved if it wasn't for the quick-acting missing persons report from Katherine's mom, who reported to the police, and their fast-acting response to attend the scene within 24 hours of her going missing. Then it is likely that Joe Romano could have had the time to dispose of all the key evidence and likely the opportunity to prevent the police from securing a conviction.
I believed that, especially with missing person cases, families know better than anybody. And I say that because most people have a close relationship with somebody and they talk to them every day. And if they don't hear from them, there's a reason. Her phone was off, and the fact that her and her husband had a rocky relationship. I mean, those are red flags for anybody, but especially for investigators.
On Friday, the 31st of May 2002, Joseph Romano was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. The police case rested almost entirely on forensic proof of a violent encounter at the Romano family home. The blood on the walls and floor and the neighbor's electric saw were enough to convince the jury that Joseph Romano had killed his wife. They agreed with the prosecution that the forensic science doesn't lie. The heart-wrenching testimony from the couple's young son was the final piece of evidence that put Joseph Romano behind bars.